In life, we are all given different titles. Like, think of the titles that you will have maybe in your life. Like, it could be a parent, you could be a father, a mother, a son, a brother. Like, I remember the first time I held my son, and I remember thinking to myself, like, I can't believe this kid is mine. And I remember when the doctors were like, oh, you're free to go. And I was thinking, there's no instruction manual with this. You're actually letting me take this child home. And I just remember the title of dad that was suddenly bestowed on me, even when I didn't feel like I was ready. And there are other titles that we have in life. Like I got the privilege of being a homeowner. And even titles that I love. Like I talk about being a Cowboys fan as one of my titles. And I love the Cowboys because I believe God loves the Cowboys and that is his team. But even in my neighborhood in Texas, I remember I got into getting all of my grass and my lawn looking a certain way. And I had the greenest lawn in the neighborhood. And I reveled in the title Lawn Master for a while. The truth is, we all have different titles that we have in our lives. Maybe you're a part of a job right now where you're an employee. Maybe you're a president. Maybe you're a CEO of something. Maybe you just had a child. Maybe you're a grandparent. Maybe you have hobbies and things you're interested in. Maybe the homeowner title is really important to you because you're investing in your home right now. But if I could for a moment, if we could just take the churchy veneer and the Jesus talk for a moment out, and I could just ask you this honest question. What title in your life is the most important? Now, I know that you're here because the title Son of God or Child of God is probably a very, very important title in your life. But honestly, as we live, one of the challenges is to make that title the most important title in our lives, because we all know what it's like to have other things that are competing. And how do you know what the most important title is? It's simply this. What do you spend your time thinking about and investing in? Because that title is the one that you are most interested in this season. But here's what I find interesting when you look at Moses' death. There's one title that Moses, who is the author of the first 5 books of the Bible, including what we've been looking at, really in the book of Exodus, there is one title in Deuteronomy 34 that he wants to make sure that is emphasized at his death. The most important title, if you will. This is what it says. It says in Deuteronomy 34:5, and Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. That's the one title, the most important title in his life he wanted to be remembered. And you think about the different titles that he had. At the very beginning of his life, we find out that one of the titles he had was that of a prince. We see the titles that he had. He was a leader of the people of God. He was a husband, he was a sibling, he was a father, and he probably had a lot of other different titles in his life, but there's one title that is the most important. And that's the one he wanted to emphasize at his death, because death has a way of prioritizing what really, really matters. The things that seem so significant right now don't probably seem that significant if you were told you had 24 hours to live. And what's interesting is we live in a culture where we suppress death. We don't want to talk about death. We try to move away from death. But I think there's a gift in the death of Moses that causes you to think about what titles you are actually living for. And maybe the invitation as we look at his life is to go, is that title of child of God, servant of God, the most important title in your life? If not, what might need to shift so that you can spend your life focused on what matters? I think about this as a pastor. One of the responsibilities, and in some ways the privileges that I have, is to officiate weddings at times, but also to officiate and to be a part of funerals. And what's interesting is I have been a part of quite a few funerals where people that have died by the world standards, they had it. They had status, they had success, they had a perfect family on the outside, they had money, they had stuff, they had all the things. But yet at their funeral, there was an emptiness. There was almost a shallowness, a soberness to the way that they had lived. And if you rewind, there was one funeral I did that was what I thought would be arguably the most tragic funeral I'd ever been a part of. It was a kid in the youth group that I was pastoring at the time, a 15-year-old boy that died of a brain aneurysm. And what's interesting is I remember going to this funeral going, I don't see how anything good could come out of a funeral where a 15-year-old boy was tragically taken. And what was sobering to me is person after person, almost 700 people from his school showed up, and they began to talk about the impact of how a kid loved God and loved them. And there was not this grieving, there was a sense of joy and hope that here, what was ironic to me is a boy 15 years old had lived a richer, fuller life than some people who were 70 and 80 years old. Why? Because he lived for the title that mattered. And that was what people repeated over and over again. Child of God. That was the thing that he got. Because in death, things begin to prioritize. And Moses wants us to get this. So let me just ask you very honestly, what title again is the one that you're living for? Maybe a second question that surfaces in Moses' death that I would have you think through is this. Are you harboring any bitterness or unforgiveness in your life? And you go, why do you speak to this? What's interesting is right before Moses dies, in Deuteronomy 34, I notice something. He begins to bless the people of God. What's interesting about this is, if you remember, and I preached on this in the sermon that I just did on the death of Moses, what's interesting is Moses actually did not get to go into the promised land because he disobeyed God. But in addition to that, he misrepresented God. But you got to ask, why? It's because the people of God began to grumble and complain. This was the 7th time that we read in the Bible that Moses has people grumbling about where they're going to get water, how they're going to have these provisions. And they begin to get dramatic, and they say things like, why did you lead us out here to die in the wilderness? Why not die in Egypt? And so Moses, after years of serving people, in fact, what's interesting in the story of Moses, you don't have one story of people encouraging and building him up. Everyone, it seems like, is after him. And so one day, in the burden and the weight of this, the Bible says he cracks. And what he does is he strikes this rock, he disobeys God, and he misrepresents God. And God causes him to miss out on the promised land. But what's interesting is, if I were Moses, I'd be thinking, the people of God did this to me. Most people, when they get wronged or they get hurt by someone, they'll blast someone. They don't bless them. Yet Moses, at the end of his life, he's not able to go in the promised land. And here's what he's doing. He's not holding on to bitterness. He has no unforgiveness. He doesn't have judgment. He doesn't have anger. He has nothing but love and blessings for the people of God. Why do I tell you this? We live in a culture, we talk about this a lot, we live in a culture that's not the United States of America, it's the divided states of America. And because of cultural events, things like COVID, I've mentioned this before, there has been more separation. Even what's interesting is if you look at churches, they are more separated than ever before. And people feel threatened by people who have different beliefs or different denominations. And what we call sort of division, I think the Bible would call bitterness, anger, and quite honestly, hatred towards people who do things different than we do. And then you throw in the pains of being in a broken world, people who have truly wronged you and hurt you. And if we're honest, it's so easy to hold on to bitterness, vengeance, and judgment. And the reason that I want to speak this to you is I think perhaps, this might be a seasoned word for somebody, more demonic activity in our culture today, I believe, is connected to bitterness and unforgiveness. What's interesting is when you actually look at a story in Ephesians, or when you look at Ephesians 4:26, there's an interesting verse in here that says this. It says, in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. And notice this, do not give the devil a foothold. So notice this, in your anger, don't sin, which means it's possible to sin, or it's possible to be angry without sinning. There's a way you can do that. I'll speak to that in a moment. But what it means is if you choose to hold on to vengeance, bitterness, you're blasting people instead of blessing people. What will end up happening in your life is you will give access. When it talks about foothold, it's the idea that you give the enemy operating room in your life. And so as a Christian, we got to be very clear. You cannot be demonically possessed, but you can be oppressed, which means the areas of light in your life can be suppressed, and you can give the enemy a place to operate in darkness. Now, the good news is Jesus is the light of the world, which means when you bring him into that situation, the darkness has to flee. But so many people go, this is my right. You've really wronged me. You really hurt me. So I'm going to tear you down. What they don't realize is you are giving the enemy a place in your life, and it's dividing you, it's crushing you, and it's conquering you. So I want to speak this into someone's life. Whoever's watching this video, the bitterness, the rage, the anger is a tool that the enemy will use to derail your life. I've seen it happen with so many people. And I find it ironic that Moses, at the end of his life, is so filled with love that he's blessing the very people that in some ways robbed him of his future. This is a picture of what it means like, or what it looks like to die well. I can't tell you the amount of people who have almost at their deathbeds tried to get right the relationships that for years they have had just in disarray. Can I encourage you, don't wait. Whatever it is, if there's anything in your life where the Lord is calling you to reconcile it, bring that into light, do that. And just real practically, the way that I say this to people is if God has someone in your life that you need to reconcile, do three things. Number one, pray about it. Just pray, ask the Lord to give you clarity. Number two, get to the point. Speak to the point, not to the past. So many times people bring in all these scenarios. Well, you said this, you did this, you did this. When someone wrongs you in that moment, go straight to them, speak about the issue. Don't bring in all the past stuff. Speak to the issue that is at hand. Because what you're going to find is you're probably going to have a lot of these conversations with people. And then be prompt. Don't harbor, don't stew on that thing. Don't let sin and bitterness grow. Because at the end of your life, you will not be able to bless people. You will find yourself angry and frustrated and disconnected. So as we think about Moses' death, just two simple questions to go back to. What is the most important title in your life? Is it son of God, daughter of God? And then second, as you think about your life, is there any place that you might be harboring some bitterness or some anger, some darkness that the Lord might want to bring into the light so that you can live free and face to face with God like Moses did?